Hi everyone, it's Michelle from the Audubon Center at Riverlands. I'm really excited to be with you today to present the Gull Basics presentation with Bill Rowe. If you've been out at Riverlands lately, you've probably seen a ton of gulls. And so this is a great time to be advancing your knowledge in gull identification. And Bill is just the person to help you do that. Before we get started, I want to share with you a little bit about our presenter. Bill Rowe is the board member and the vice president of education for St. Louis Audubon Society. He's also an excellent birder, and if you've spent any time at all at the Audubon Center at Riverlands, you've probably seen Bill out there birding or met him a couple times. Bill's also a skilled teacher. He's been teaching birding classes and leading guided bird walks around the St. Louis region for around 30 years. And in his professional career, he spent most of his time teaching and as an administrator at the Thomas Jefferson School in St. Louis, with 11 of those years as head of school. Bill has also led birding tours all around North America. And so today we have not only a very knowledgeable birder, but someone who loves teaching and someone who I think is going to make this presentation a lot of fun for all of us. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Bill. And Bill, I want to say thank you one more time for joining us today.
Great. Thank you very much, Michelle. And I can't see anyone out there, but I welcome all of you. And I hope you're ready to dive in and learn a little bit more about gulls and how they, not so much how they live their lives. That's basically eating fish and resting. But more about how to tell one from another. When I take people on field trips up to Riverlands or to Carlisle Lake or any of the other places that have some pretty big amount of water, we generally see gulls, and people are curious about how can we tell one from another if you say there's so many kinds out there, but they all kind of look alike to us. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on gulls, winter gulls. In fact, we actually don't have any true summer gulls in the sense of ones that nest here in our area. All of the gulls nest farther north than Missouri. The ones that are closest are around Lake Michigan and Chicago, and then on up through the North Woods and the lakes up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and on into Ontario and Canada, and then up into the Arctic. So let's get started with something other than text on the screen. If you looked at Facebook before, you may have noticed this quick quiz where I asked you how many gull species are shown in each slide. It's supposed to be very quick, and you would give me your best thought. And the answer is, in one of them, there's 2 species, and in the other, there's 1 species. But we're not going to tell you yet which one. We'll come back to that and see how you did. Some of the preliminaries. There's good news and there's bad news. The good news for watching gulls and studying them is that they do a lot of sitting still. They also do a lot of flying around, like down below the dam and the spillway, but they will gather on the ice or on the sandbar or whatever, and let you study them with your binoculars or hopefully your spotting scope, because that's the way to really see them. Unlike, let's say, warblers or sparrows or many other birds that where the trick is to get them to sit still for even a couple of seconds so you can look at them. Well, gulls are helpful in that way. Another helpful thing is that there's no difference between males and females. A little bit on size and shape sometimes, but unlike, let's say, red-winged blackbirds, where males and females look totally different in their plumage, in gulls, they're essentially the same. So that's a good thing. And the third thing is the common gulls around here are only of a few species. You can identify nearly everything you see by getting used to the 4 common species, and only 2 of those are around in the winter, like right now. Those are the ones I'm going to focus on. The bad news is that you do have to take into account that they can look very different at different ages. And which marks you use, what features you look for to identify them depends on knowing or guessing at least how old they are. And even within one age group, there can be a lot of variation. They can look many different ways, not exactly just what I'm going to show you, and not exactly just what's in your field guide. The third thing is that it can be subtle and tricky to pick out some of the scarcer and rarer species, but that's a lot of the fun. That's why people are up there now with this week in the cold weather with their binoculars and their scopes, looking for certain of the more unusual ones, mostly ones that have come down from the Arctic. So we're going to go over some of those species too after we've learned about the common ones. So here's some preliminaries. Any adult gull is going to have a smooth color on its back and wings, which I will call the mantle. That's the dominant color on the bird. They'll also have a all white tail, and most of the underparts will be white as well. There will sometimes, very often in the winter, there's some streaking or mottling on their head, but for the most part, the bird will look white. Any gull that isn't adult, however old it may be, 1 year, 2 years, whatever, it will have something to disrupt those features. It'll have some kind of discoloration or mottling on the back and wings. It'll have some dark color in the tail and some kind of color or pattern underneath, and we'll take a look at that. Okay, let's start with our most common gull at nearly all times of the year. As I mentioned, even the ring-billed gull, which nests as close as Lake Michigan, is still fairly far north of us in the summer. We do get a few of them hanging out along the Mississippi in the summer, but the numbers don't start accumulating until about August, when they have finished their nesting up there in wherever they were, and they start drifting southward. And so we get flocks of even up to a few hundred birds in August and September, and increasing on through the fall. Notice that this picture compares the adult in the front with the nice smooth gray mantle all over and its yellow bill with a black ring, with a first year bird in back there, which has a different color bill, pink with a black tip. It's got a little bit of gray in the back, but a lot more brownish stuff all over its feathers. So it's more mottled looking and rather different. And there's other differences too. So let's dive into, what does this mean, adult versus first year? What does that mean? And another question is, how do gulls get from one stage to another? And I'll just tell you the word. The key word is that they molt. All birds molt, because if they just kept their feathers without molting them, the feathers eventually would be useless because they wear out. Pretty soon the bird wouldn't be able to fly. Most birds will go through a complete molt of all their feathers at least once a year. And that means that the old feathers actually drop out, not all at once, but in groups, and new ones grow in. On this bird, you can see, for instance, the tail. See what a mess that is? Those feathers are all worn. They need to drop out and new tail feathers will grow in. This bird does have some new feathers in. I think these gray feathers on the back are fresh and have recently grown in. The wings are a mess. So birds need that kind of rejuvenation every year. So let's see how this actually works. Okay, so I told you those ring-billed gulls up in Lake Michigan, they'll be nesting, and they will have, the eggs will hatch, out will come some young, and by the time they leave the nest, they actually have a complete set of feathers that they wear, and they can fly around. And they are the normal size, the same size as adults. These are called juveniles. So juvenile is not how they behave or their attitude. It is the fact that they're wearing their first actual set of feathers. So it's a very specific term. And these are the youngest of the first year group of birds. Now, what happens in the course of a few months, they will molt some of these feathers that you see. They tend to molt their head and body first, some in the back, and then they keep those wing feathers for a much longer time. And the result, let's say by October or November, is that they may look like this. You've got some text there that if you ever came back to this talk on Facebook or YouTube, you could refer to this and it'll remind you what I said. So there's been some limited molt, and what it's produced, even in this bird that's only a few months old, is some nice clean gray feathers on the back that look like the feathers it's going to have as an adult. They're the same color, that light gray color. But the wings are still all checkered, mottled, with out toward the tips, all black. And the bill is, excuse me, that's going to happen a bunch. The bill is pink with a black tip. That's not like the adult. And the legs are pinkish too, which in this case is not like the adult either. So you're going to watch a lot of things change. One more thing that changes is the eye. Notice the eye is dark. This photo is really a nice close-up, so you can be sure that you're seeing that correctly. And furthermore, when the bird flies around, it has other features that are interesting and different from the way it's going to be later, specifically the tail. It has a whitish base tail with a nice wide, clear black tail band out at the tip. That's very obvious when you see them down at the dam flying around. You notice, I'll go back to this bird. I commented on those nice smooth gray feathers that have already come in. There they are in the middle, forming a kind of a gray saddle. The wing pattern is complex, and there's no need to really describe it because you don't need to know that to identify the bird. This is a young ring-billed gull in its first winter. I should mention here that ring-billed gulls are about medium size for a gull. They're the size of a medium-sized duck, like say a wood duck. Not real big, but not the smallest ones either. Toward the end of that first year, after the first winter is over and maybe this bird is kind of hung around into, let's say, May, it's beginning to look like a mess again, like that one we saw on the other slide. The wing feathers have worn and faded, bleached from the sun. The edges are all frayed. Here in the middle, you can actually see these little white wing quills with most of the actual feather worn away. So this bird needs to molt, and it will do that. It will probably go back north. We don't see many in the summer, as I said. So it will head back north for a while, and it will undergo that first complete molt again before it comes back to visit us again in the following fall. And the following fall and winter, we call it a second winter bird. Okay, it lived with us. First winter was actually the age of, let's say, 4 months to 10 months or so. And now it's coming back in the second winter. It's about 1.5 years old, if you think about being born in the summer. So what you notice here is that it's already turned a lot farther toward adult. You have a lot more gray on the back and wings, but you do have a kind of a still messy black out at the tip of the wing. It hasn't yet developed its special adult white wing pattern. It has developed here the yellow bill with the black ring that the adult has, and its legs are going that direction. They're a kind of a greenish yellow. Notice that, remember that black tail band? Well, this bird has remnants of it, black spots in the tail. That can be greater or lesser. There's a lot of variation here, but if you start studying the ring-billed gulls as you see them flying around, you will begin to notice that some of them look like this. And you'll pick up those tail spots and you'll say, oh, that's a second winter bird. And here it is standing. It looks this way, it looks more like an adult, but you will notice again that it has greenish legs instead of bright yellow. Its eye is starting to get pale. You can actually see the pupil in there against a dull, maybe a dull kind of greenish yellow iris. And the wings, the pointed ends of the wings, I'll give you a specialized word. The name for these is the primaries. Those are still all black without the spots that they'll get as an adult. So at a glance, at a distance, it looks like an adult, but you can tell it isn't. After 3 years, or after 2.5, it comes back as a third winter bird or anything beyond that because it's now an adult. So it takes ring-billed gulls 3 years to get to this stage where they now have the nice clean black wing pattern with a sort of black triangle and these little spots up at the tip of the wings. Those are characteristic for each species. It has, remember that adults have a completely white tail. I've got that there. The bill looks like an adult. And the thing you can't see very well in this photo is the yellow legs, but we'll get to that right here. There is a ring-billed gull with its pretty bright yellow legs, bright yellow bill with a black ring, and a staring pale eye, which is now characteristic of adult ring-bills. I'll mention here, give about that eye color, that ring-bills and the next one up, herring gulls, start with dark eyes when they're young. You saw that. And now they've turned into pale-eyed birds as adults. That isn't true of all gulls. If you see an adult that is all clean gray and white like this, but it has a dark eye, and you can be sure of that, you probably have a rare bird, one of the less frequently found ones. That can be a field mark, but you have to know that it applies only to adults. Okay, so the ringbill is a 3-year gull. What next? Well, the other bird that's common now, oh, I forgot this slide. This is our little quiz, our in-between quiz here. Can you find any first winter and second winter birds among the adults that are sitting on the ice here? The adults, of course, being the ones with the bright yellow legs and the little clean white wing spots and the yellow bill with a black ring. I'll give you 1 second to just look that over. The answer is yes, of course. Let's find some. Of course, you found these. Look on the left, the middle bird has pink legs. Therefore, it's got to be a first winter bird. In addition, it doesn't have a yellow bill with a black ring. It has a pink-based bill with a black tip. And it's got a kind of a messy wing pattern and all black in the primaries. So that's a first winter bird. Over on the right, you have one that looks more like an adult, but look at the legs. They're greenish instead of bright yellow. And look at the primaries. They have little bitty white spots next to an adult, which has more normal-sized white spots. So you can pick that out as a second winter bird. And there were a couple of others in the picture. Now let's move on. We've done the main stages of 3-year gull, the ring-billed, and so you can identify those 3 stages during our winter. In the summer, it might be a little trickier. Time to move on to 4-year gulls, and our common one is called a herring gull. Herring gulls also come to us from a very wide area of the North Country, mostly Canada, And also some of large populations of herring gull nest on the East Coast and on the northwestern coasts of North America as well. Herring gulls tend to come down later, and they get numerous when the weather gets cold. And when we get an Arctic front like we have now, this is when herring gulls come in the biggest numbers. Occasionally, there are thousands of them, and they actually displace the ringbills. That hasn't happened yet. Okay, here's what a juvenile herring gull looks like. Well, you remember juvenile. This is the first stage right out of the nest. And this is a very dark bird all over. That's unlike any stage of ring-billed gull. So it's like we've inserted a whole different plumage here. If you see a real dark one, it's probably a young herring gull. In addition, they're bigger than the ringbills. And so when we see them as first winter gulls, come, let's say, October, November, on through right now, they may look like this, because some of them hold their juvenile plumage pretty well, or they may look a little different like this, not quite as dark. Maybe the back has changed a little bit, but they're still basically an all over brown large gull. That's your first winter herring gull. Here it is standing next to ringbills. It is bigger. We see it kind of angled, so it's hard to be sure, but it's not hugely bigger. This is not a very big herring gull, but it has a big bill, and you can kind of compare that to the ringbill on the right as well. Okay, moving along. What does a herring gull in its first winter look like in flight? Well, as you can expect, it is still a big all-brown gull. And so that's your first clue. It also has not just instead of a white tail with a tail band, it's got an all black tail. These feathers above the base of the tail are actually body feathers that are called coverts, and they're heavily barred with brown. So you get a not too contrasty black tail versus brown barred upper part there. The head of this herring gull is paling out, it's turning white, and that does happen to a lot of them. And the herring gull has one special feature: the primaries are blackish on the outers, but in the inner ones here, they are pale, and I'm calling attention to that, and you'll see why later on. It's a field mark against finding a rarer one. Okay, so there's your herring gull flying around. What happens when the herring gull comes back a year later? It comes back as a second winter bird. Again, I'm repeating the same cycle now. And it has grown some gray on the back. And that was like what we pointed out with the ringbills, except those were first winter ringbills. So herring has added that first dark 1 year dark stage in between. So now we have a second winter herring that's kind of analogous to a first winter ringbill with gray coming in. Here's what he looks like in flight. You can see slightly the gray saddle on the back. That's he's molting in some adult gray. His basal tail area has gotten a lot whiter, mainly through wear. That barring is worn off. He's still got a mostly black tail, or at least a very wide band of it. And he still has this pale window in the inner primaries. Notice that this one has a pale eye. That is real variable when they get that, but it's started already to turn very pale on this bird. I want to mention that this picture up in the upper left has the credit for the photographer, whose name is Doug Hommert. He's a local photographer who takes wonderful bird pictures, and he has very kindly given permission for us to use as many as we want of his. What happens when the herring gull comes back in the third winter? Well, what happened to the ringbills in the second winter? They started looking a lot like real adults, didn't they? Kids grow up. So here's the third winter herring, and it has started to look like an adult too. The thing is, it doesn't yet have the good white spots in the primaries, just a little hint of them. It has a yellow bill now, but it's got a big black sort of blob on it that would almost make you think ring-billed gull. So you have to look and make sure, well, no, that's a bigger bird. That's a herring gull. And the legs, well, wait, what color were the legs? Oh, they were pink back on the first winter bird, just like on a ringbill. They were pink on a second winter bird, like a ringbill. But what happened to the ringbill's legs when it was adult? They turned yellow, right? Not on the herring gull, they stay pink. And here's an adult. This is a fully adult herring gull. It's even in the summer or breeding aspect of its plumage. So there's no dark streaking on the head. It will have that in the winter, but it's got the big yellow bill with a red spot underneath. It's got the white spots in the primaries, and it's got pink legs. Plus, when it's standing there, it is bigger than the ringbills. Now, which picture has a bird that's bigger than the ringbills with pink legs? Guess what? The right-hand picture. So this is the picture that had two species. What's on the left picture? Only ring-billed gulls. The thing is, most of them are adults, and these two here are still mostly in their juvenile plumage. In other words, this picture was shot in August when these young birds are still very young and juvenile, and they have just come down from, I'm guessing, from Lake Michigan, because that's the closest place they would come from. Okay, so moving right along with the answers. We're going to take a quick look now. We have a few minutes left for my target time. And I want to look at 4 other kinds of gulls that mostly come here in the cold weather. And most of these that I've listed there are present now up at the Melprice Dam, which is at Riverlands. It's the spillway that you drive down to at the end of Riverlands Way, or you can drive around to the north side through Alton and go to the Great Rivers Museum area and look at the gulls from there and watch them sitting at closer range on the walls of the Glaucous Dam. These species, as I said, make up a tiny fraction of the gulls that are there, but they're part of the reason that the birders go there and freeze to death and study those gulls, is because they are there now, and this is our chance to see them and pick them out. So, and that actually can be really fun. It's exhilarating to find something that you know is different. And here's how some of them are different. The first one is the most numerous generally of these more unusual gulls, and it is very often findable at Riverlands or down at the dam by just looking over the gull flocks and look for a bird with a dark back, a dark gray back. That's called a lesser black-backed gull. It isn't really black, it's charcoal gray. And these photos here actually even exaggerate how black it may look. Sometimes it's very clearly a darkish gray, not a black. But at any rate, they go age by age, more or less like herring gulls. And by the time they're in their middle stages, they have begun to get some of that very dark gray on the back, so you can identify them. And when they're adults like these birds, they're fully dark gray on the back. And they have a yellow bill with a red spot, again, like a herring gull. One thing they are different from herring gulls in is the leg color, which is yellow on a lesser blackback. And here is a good example of how the contrast looks between one of the lesser blackbacks sitting there next to some ringbills. It would be the same next to adult herrings because they have the same gray color. Now, here's a tricky one. The young lesser blackbacks in their first winter are very much like herring gulls. When they're just sitting still, you usually can't even be sure. They're usually a little smaller. They have a longer, more drawn out shape, but you just can't be certain until you see them fly or at least spread their wings. And the key thing to look for is that tail pattern. Lesser blackback has a white base tail with a big wide tail band. It's sort of reminiscent of those ringbills, except that the tail band is usually wider. The rest of the bird is brown gray like a herring gull. And look at the wing. Herring gull has that distinct, obvious pale area that I talked about. And the lesser blackback gull has almost none of it, just a very slight indistinct window there. At a glance, it looks like the whole outer wing is all dark. In fact, the whole bird has a generally somewhat darker look for that reason. There's a couple of other things too, but we're going to stick with that. See the tail pattern if you want to be sure. Okay, you noticed that there was something named a great black-backed gull. Well, this comes in very, very small numbers and only occasionally, but it's different from a lesser blackback by far. It is the biggest gull in the world, actually. It's usually bigger than a herring by quite a bit. Some of them can be smallish and hardly different from a herring, but it's always got a massive black bill when it's this age, this first winter age, and very strongly checkered back and wings, like black. The feathers have an intricate dark brown and white pattern that makes them look, I use the word checkered, and that's what a lot of the field guides will say too. The head and body tend to be much whiter than on your average herring gull. Now, what do they look like in flight? They look like that. So they have a tail pattern that's kind of like I described for lesser blackback, with a wide black band. It kind of tapers off toward the corners. It's widest in the middle and then tapered at the ends, white in the inner part, and then that humongous black bill against a white head. And when the bird's flying around or standing on the ice, you ought to be able to tell that it's a big, big bird by comparison with even the herring gulls. Okay, the next two, well, I've got one more picture here. We don't see many adults of that species, the great blackback, but when we do, it's quite striking. It really is black, blacker than any lesser, hardly any contrast at all with the black wingtips. And again, with this great big bill, which now is yellow with a red spot, like that's the typical herring pattern, and pink legs. These birds come not from the Arctic, but from the North Atlantic coast, New England and the maritime provinces. And some of them come over in the winter to the Great Lakes, including Lake Michigan. And I think that probably we get our birds in cold weather coming down from Lake Michigan in that area. Two more to go here. This is the other extreme. This isn't a black-backed gull. This is a very white-looking gull. It's called a Glaucous gull, and it comes from the Arctic. It's a common bird all across Arctic Canada. It's nearly as big as a great blackback. Some of them, again, can be as small as a herring, but it's very distinctive in color. The first winter birds like this have a kind of a tan or beige color. The darker ones are almost like toast color, but they always have white wingtips. There's a good example here, but see this one sitting? He's got white wingtips. That's unlike any gull we've talked about so far, because all of those at any age have black wingtips. So if you want to look for something rare and you like the big white birds, look for the wingtips. They're white. And a Glaucous gull also has a big pink bill with a black tip, strikingly bicolored bill. And that'll tell you that it's a Glaucous gull. And here's another one, another good example. This one is whiter even than the previous one, although you can see some brown on the body, pale brown. It's got the big bicolored bill and really white wingtips. A very striking bird. And you notice how it makes the ring-billed gull next to it look pretty puny. Okay, finally, we get to, I keep forgetting that I brought the adult pictures into. This is an adult glaucous gull. And again, we don't get as many of these as we do of those young birds. But when we do, they too are striking. They have pure white wingtips. Everything else is sort of along the lines of a herring. The gray is paler, but still the eye is yellow, the bill is yellow, the legs are pink. So it's kind of on the herring model, but paler and totally white-winged. One more species, bear with me. This is the tricky one, but there are several of these birds up at Riverlands at the dam right now. I think I can pretty much guarantee that. One person, a very good birder, went up there and found them and photographed a series of at least 4 of them this past Sunday. Okay, the field guides haven't quite caught up with the way these things are classified right now. There are actually 2 forms that are under the heading of the species Iceland gull. There's a paler one with this German guy's name, Kumlin's gull, and there's a darker one called Thayer's gull. In either form, it's a large gull but smaller than a herring and has a slighter bill, so it looks a little, you might say, gentler and less mean than a herring gull. And here's what the Kumlin's form looks like. You might take a look at that one on the left and say, hey, that's what you told us a glaucous gull looks like, kind of beigey or light tan all over with whitish wingtips. Well, I did, but this is a smaller bird and its bill will be black through the winter. Remember, the glaucous gull had a pink bill with a black tip. It's also bigger. This has a smaller bill that's black. The adults have a real variable, but in the wingtip, they're still pale-looking birds, but the wingtip is anywhere from a teeny bit of gray or almost pure white to a lot of gray on several of the outer primaries, and this one's kind of in the middle. It's clearly this kind of bird with just a little gray showing. It's the other form, the Thayer's, that is the most difficult to be sure of and identify. But for those of you who haven't fallen asleep, I'm going to go through it real quick. First winter birds, look at it on the left there. It looks a lot like a herring gull. There's some little differences that I'm not going to describe because they might just throw you off. There's one thing you really need to see if you want to know for sure that it's a Thayer's Iceland gull, and that is the underwing pattern, the primaries here. When it raises its wing or when it's flying around, the under primaries look all silvery white with just little dark tips. A herring gull shows a lot more black or blackish or darkish color in those primaries. But this is actually very striking, as you see it was in this photograph. So an otherwise herring-like bird that's all brown is going to show this underwing that's whitish, making it look like one of those other white-winged gulls from below. And what happens to adults? Kind of the same thing. On the left, there's an adult Thayer's Iceland gull. The dark eye is a clue that it's something different. If that was a herring, it would be a staring yellow eye. But at a distance, you might not be able to see that. But you can see what Doug Hommert shot on the right there with that wing pattern from below. It's all pale, in this case, kind of a silvery gray color with little black wingtips. So now you know how to tell a Thayer's gull when you see one. Okay, you have an idea what to look for, some of the places you can go, not just Riverlands, but any place that has some water with a lot of fish in it. Up at Winfield, the Winfield Dam, over in Illinois, Carlisle Lake is a superb place for gull watching. Nearer to us, Horseshoe Lake is a good place to go. So thank you very much. And I'll let Michelle look at the chat now and tell me if there's any questions. I can probably flip back to the right picture if you have follow-ups on some of these images.
All right, Bill, thank you. We do have quite a few questions coming in on the chat.
I was afraid of that. Okay.
So everyone's really enjoying the presentation. Lots of good feedback. So the first question I think I'll ask you is that someone wants to know of any different behaviors that characterize gulls. Are there behaviors that really characterize gulls? And then there's a follow-up question.
Okay, the meaning, do they characterize one versus another so you can use it for identification? The answer is pretty much no, that all these gulls that we've described spend their time flying around, basically trying to catch some fish, because that's what they live on. They're not above taking dead fish. In fact, when there's a fish kill, you'll see a lot of gulls. But you also can watch them flying around below the dam, and they'll drop down to the water and grab a fish. And sometimes a ring-billed gull will grab a fish, and the bigger herring gulls will come in and steal it. But you'll see that happening, and they fly, they swoop, and then eventually they get tired of doing that, and they need to just rest and digest their food, and they go sit on some ice or the wall of the loch, or maybe a mud bar, a sand bar, if that's available. Right now, it would be the ice. And they may gather in big flocks on the ice. Sometimes you'll see 500 or 1,000 gulls sitting together. What was the follow-up?
You answered it. It was actually about if there were behavioral differences between herring and ring-billed gulls.
Not really. Not enough that you could make an identification on that basis.
Mm-hmm.
You have to judge size, and the best way for that is comparison, to have them next to each other, and then you judge by those colors. The easiest at a distance in flying around, especially if you're just looking with naked eye or binoculars, the best key to picking out a quick herring gull is look for those first winter birds that are all dark brown, flying around with the other gulls, which are gray and white.
All right. A next question comes from a very eager 7-year-old who is tuning in her family at home. She wants to know about gull migration, and specifically is asking about herring gulls. How far do they travel?
Well, it's hard to know. What's her name? Did she say her name?
Genevieve?
Genevieve. Hey, thank you for your question, Genevieve. It's hard to know because our gulls can come from such a wide variety of places. I said the ringbills probably some of them come from Lake Michigan. That's not very far. Chicago is a 5-hour drive from here. But most of the others come from a lot farther. Some of the herring gulls that we see, they might come from 1,000 miles away, way up in Canada. They might come from the East Coast. If we see a great black-backed gull, we know pretty for sure that it came from the Northeast coast. It might have come from Newfoundland or Maine or Massachusetts. It's come a long way. And the Glaucous and Iceland gulls, those white ones, they come down from the Arctic. So they might have been also a couple of 1,000 miles just to get here. So that's one reason that they are not very common here. That this is not the usual place where big numbers of those kinds go to spend the winter, but some of them do. And that's the nice thing about birds, is they have wings and they can get around. So you will often find birds that are kind of out of place or a bit unusual for where you see them, but they were common somewhere else.
Excellent. Thank you. So the next question is about coexistence of gulls. So how do gulls get along with each other when they happen to be in the same place at the same time?
Well, I think I described the one sort of criminal interaction that the bigger gulls will sometimes pick on the littler ones in the sense of stealing their fish away from them. But that doesn't happen enough. For one thing, fish are abundant there. That's how come there's so many gulls gathering there. They all come for the same food source, and then they spend a lot of their time actually doing their fishing. But there isn't much other problem. They will sit in mixed flocks on the ice to rest, and they're fine. They're just all mixed together. It doesn't really matter. And the same is true of lots of other birds. When you look for swallows in the spring and the fall, there will be 5 or 6 kinds of swallows sitting together at random on phone wires. Or there'll be all kinds of different warblers migrating through in the spring in mixed flocks with maybe 5 or 10 species in a flock, and so forth.
So one person mentioned that their dream is to one day to see a Sabine's gull. Maybe have you seen one, do you have a dream gull to see, Bill?
Well, I have a dream gull to see from Missouri because I already saw one in Illinois. My son and I found a bird called a black-tailed gull over at Carlisle Lake, and most of the things at Carlisle Lake are found by other birders who go there every weekend, but we got lucky and found this one, which was the first time that one had ever been seen at Carlisle or in that part of Illinois. And it's never been seen in Missouri, so that would be one that, yeah, I would love to find that here in our state. The other one that he mentioned, the Sabine's gull, is a regular migrant in very small numbers over big bodies of water. It's an Arctic gull, and most of them divide out and go down the Atlantic coast or the Pacific coast way out to sea. But some of the young ones go through the center of the continent, and they will hit reservoirs and big lakes and sometimes rivers, whatever they can find that's closest thing to the ocean. The best place to look, where they occur pretty much every year, but a little unpredictable, is Carlisle Lake in Illinois, which you may know is about an hour's drive east of here. Very big lake, and people scan that all the time, and they usually come up with at least a couple of Sabine's gulls every year at a particular window. It's usually mid to late September that those birds show up. That's more predictable than most gulls are, to tell the truth. Did that answer the question okay?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's given the person tuning in some good tips on where they can find them.
Okay, great. You want me to mention if people own field guides, where to go to review this stuff and learn more?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would name 3 or 4. There's 2 field guides that I always recommend for beginning birding to get oriented, but still have a good, thorough source of showing and describing every bird. And one of them, I'll give the authors because the name's usually the same, like Field Guide to Birds of North America. But the authors to look for the beginning guides are Ken Kaufman, Kaufman, who has a handy sized, very, very good little field guide that he put out using doctored photographs of birds. The other is by Roger Torrey Peterson, who was the famous founder of the whole field guide idea. And his book, he's been deceased for quite a while now, but his book continues to get revised by other authors. And so it is pretty up to date, and often is an excellent book to do your initial learning from. And that's called The Field Guide to the Birds. So you look for The Field Guide to the Birds of Eastern and Central North America under the name Roger Torrey Peterson, and you look for the 7th edition. The 2 that are more advanced and give you more information of the kind I did here are, one is by David Sibley, The Sibley Guide to Birds. That's kind of a big book, but he made a smaller version of it that's handy to put in your pocket. The other is called the National Geographic Field Guide. That's also in its 7th edition. both of those are excellent field guides for all birds, in addition to just gulls, but they're both really good for gulls too. Okay, what's next? Sorry to butt in like that, but I
No,
thought.
that's great. Someone else mentioned a field guide to gulls specifically that was their go-to, Gulls of the World, by Klaus Malling Olsen. Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, I wasn't even going to go there, but yes, there will, as with many different groups of birds, there are some specialty books that you can get if you want to invest the $30, $40, $50 and spend, have a whole book that's nothing but gulls. Gulls of the World by Klaus Malling Olsen is super. He actually was the co-author of another one that's bigger and fatter and has more details in it, which is the gulls of Europe, Asia, and North America. And then there's one by American authors called Gulls of the Americas, and that's by John Dunn, D-U-N-N, and Steve N.G. Howell, H-O-W-E-L-L, Dunn and Howell. That one also is an excellent book. So you got some great resources if you want to dig in and just, if you want to cure insomnia, there you go.
Great advice. Yeah, the person who mentioned that book earlier is saying now on Facebook it's totally worth the purchase. So the last question I'm seeing right now is another one about field guides, Bill. So they want to know if you've looked through Gulls Simplified by Pete Dunn and Kevin Carlson, but I think actually you might have just mentioned that one.
No, I didn't. The author Pete Dunn is also a real great bird book author, D-U-N-N-E. The other guy who wrote the specialty guide to Gulls of the Americas is John Dunn, J-O-N-D-U-N-N without an E. And Pete Dunn and Kevin Carlson's book, I'm not closely familiar with it, but I think it's very good. So I think it deliberately simplifies some things and leaves out some detail just in the interest of getting through more material and making it more memorable. So it might be, you might think of it as kind of a middle level book. I hope that helps some. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, well, those are all of our questions online, Bill, but lots of thanks coming in, so I want to make sure to pass that on to you. And again, I want to say thank you from the team at the Audubon Center at Riverlands for this excellent presentation today.
Let me add that if anybody has other questions that they think of, you can look on the St. Louis Audubon website and send them in, and they will get directed to me.
Excellent.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
All right, thanks, Bill. Have a good evening, everyone.